Welcome to AUSA's Army Matters podcast, focusing on what's important to the total Army community. We bring vital Army conversations and interviews on issues relevant to soldiers, military families, and all of you amazing Army supporters. Rotating each week, our show includes Soldier Today, Army Real Talk, Family Voices, and Thought Leaders. Let's tune into the show.
I'm here to announce the completion of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and the end of the military mission to evacuate American citizens, third country nationals, and vulnerable Afghans. The last C-17 lifted off from Hamid Karzai International Airport on August 30th, this afternoon, at 3:29 p.m. East Coast time, and the last manned aircraft is now clearing the airspace above Afghanistan. We will soon release a photo of the last C-17 departing Afghanistan with Major General Chris Donahue and the U.S. Ambassador to Afghanistan, Ross Wilson, aboard.
Welcome to a special three-part edition of Army Matters. I'm Colonel Retired Scott Halstead, the Director of AUSA's Center of Leadership.
And I'm Gina Cavallaro, Senior Staff Writer at Army Magazine. The voice in that soundbite is Marine General Kenneth McKenzie, the commander of U.S. Central Command, announcing the end of U.S. operations in Afghanistan after 20 years. And I'll never forget those images from those days, Scott. How about you?
No, Gina, I was glued to social media and my TV for those 2 weeks in August, like most of the Army and most of America, watching this unfold in real time.
Well, Scott, you and I just came back from a trip to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It was a quick trip. And I wonder, how did it feel for you to be back at Fort Bragg? Because you're a almost lifelong All-American 82nd Airborne veteran.
Gina, it's always good to go to Fort Bragg. There's an energy there that I don't think I've experienced anywhere else in the Army. And so from doing PT in the morning with paratroopers to sitting down with these men and women and hearing their stories about Afghanistan. And some of them had done multiple tours in Afghanistan, so they have a unique perspective. And for many of them, it's their first time ever deploying. And so I think we learned the scope of the mission was much greater than we anticipated. And certainly the emotional complexity of the mission was greater than we could have anticipated. But we heard it firsthand from those
absolutely.
paratroopers.
I couldn't agree more. It's hard to believe, the mission seemed like when we were watching it on TV, it just seemed like it was more than 2 weeks, but it was only about 2 weeks that from the time they left Fort Bragg to the time they got back and completed that mission. And boy, did they get a lot done during that time.
They did, and we actually learned more about the mission than I had previously read. So, for example, we now know that coalition of soldiers and Marines with their interagency partners, they successfully evacuated and changed the lives of more than 124,000 American citizens, NATO allies, and of course our vulnerable Afghan partners in August of 2021.
Amazing. What were some of the other units that were there?
So we know about the two Marine Corps battalions, although they didn't work for General Donohue and Commander Pitt, but all the U.S. Army units worked directly for the 82nd Airborne Division. And so that task force included Task Force 194 Armor from the Minnesota Army National Guard. And that battalion was already forward deployed to Kuwait and got called forward to Afghanistan to help with the evacuation mission. The 23rd Military Police Company from Fort Drum, New York was on the ground, as well as elements of the 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Division from Fort Polk, Louisiana. And all of these Army units really augmented the people we talked to who served with the 1st Brigade Combat Team, 82nd Airborne Division, located at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
So at Fort Bragg, I thought it was great. We got invited to go to their new recording studio at Division headquarters and sit down with General Donohue and Command Sergeant Major Pitt. And then we, over the course of the day, we also spoke with the other paratroopers. So General Donohue graduated from West Point in 1992. You graduated from West Point too, but not that year. What year did you graduate?
1991.
91, okay. Well, he certainly has had a busy 29 years since then, much of which has been in the special operations community. He's got tons of deployments to the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. And I can only imagine how dangerous some of those missions must have been, but those missions are just generally not known to the public. So the mission to close out operations in Afghanistan may have been the highest profile one he's led. And in fact, he's that guy in the now famous photo of the last U.S. soldier in Afghanistan, the green photo we've all seen all over the place. So when we sat down with General Donohue and Command Sergeant Major Pitt, we started our conversation by asking General Donohue how that very public operation fits in with his career as a quiet professional. Let's have a listen. So I guess what I want to know is this mission to close out operations in Afghanistan may have been the most high-profile mission you've ever done. How does that fit into your career, and how did that help you see the battlefield differently or the field of operations differently?
Without a doubt, many of the other things you've talked about, we've done a lot of pretty unique things. I've been very fortunate to be part of it, but this was without a doubt the most public. In fact, whenever we got out of Afghanistan, I texted my wife and said, "Hey, I just want you to know we're out." And she wrote back and said, I know. And then she texted me the picture, right? Which I'm not, anyone who knows me knows I wish that picture wasn't out there.
Well, how do you feel about that picture? It is a famous picture. It's iconic.
I think, so I was one of the first people into Afghanistan. Then I was the NATO Special Operations Component Commander whenever we started to go through the process of getting an agreement with the Taliban, with General Miller. So, I knew intimately how we wanted the war to end. And as I always remind people, starting wars are easy. Everyone in the military knows this. Ending wars are hard, right? That's the hard part. So whenever you say what was going through your mind from day one, and we can go through the myriad of tasks we had to do and then had to come back to the first thing is, I really want to highlight is, one, General McKenzie was a great boss, gave crystal clear guidance. The rest of the team that we were with out there at HKIA, Pete Vaisley, Brigadier General Sullivan, everyone who you mentioned, absolutely great people. The Brigadier General Sullivan and his team worked for Admiral Vaisley. He was a great, great teammate. The State Department, other agency folks, I can go on and on. Just we were very, very fortunate, part of a great team. That's the first thing. The next thing, though, as soon as we landed on the ground, we kept everything with the end in mind. What did we want everything to look like whenever we departed Afghanistan? And that drove everything that we did. And I think probably the first 96 hours were the most important 96 hours for us to accomplish what ultimately, General McKenzie tasked us to do. So as soon as we landed, the first thing we did is we went and linked in with Admiral Pete Vaisley, who we were in support of. And then also the Marines that were working directly for Pete. So we went out and we visited all of the gates that were open at the time. And then we went around, and most importantly, we went around and looked at the perimeter. And the thing that jumped out at me about the perimeter is that the Taliban were really inside the perimeter.
Inside the airfield?
They were inside the airfield initially. And that's whenever we said, okay, we've got to push the Taliban outside of the airhead immediately. And I went back and spoke to both Admiral Vaisley and then also to the CENTCOM commander and said, hey, we're going to push the Taliban out. So that really led to, we went out and, as an example, we went into the international airport,
like in the terminal?
Location, in the terminal, and there were Taliban in there. There were Taliban on the roof. So we initially got together, we physically removed them from the terminal. And then we actually met with the Taliban. This was the first coordination that we had to do with the Taliban, at least from the 82nd perspective. And it was, hey, number one, we have to establish this perimeter. And we're going to establish the perimeter. There are no options. And we did that. They understood why, and we pushed them outside of the airfield itself. And the second is we had to depressurize the gates. Just because they were so overflowing. And that led into many, many other conversations. Other people were part of that, not just us. But that was sort of that very first snapshot of the two things we knew we had to do. And then we met with all the allies, partners, everyone else. And we came up with what we knew the key tasks were that we had to do. We just had to conduct day in and day out operations. We had to control access to the airfield. We had to retrograde all the coalition personnel and other interagency, partners as well from the U.S. and other nations. We had to demilitarize all the equipment that was out there, and then we had to plan and execute the joint tactical exfil. So that time period where you're the most vulnerable whenever you're finally, departing the country. And then there's a number of other be prepared tasks that we had to do. Very quickly you realize, whoa, there's a lot to do here. And then you have to execute everything as well. So that was the first thing that sat down. And then we very quickly worked out all of this with Admiral Baisley. As he's trying to run just the current operations at the gates with Brigadier General Sullivan.
Okay. Was it as chaotic as it looked from our seat back here in the States? People on the tarmac, or was that already settled by the time you got there? I mean, it didn't ever look settled, but like you said, you had to depressurize the gates and get people to be more orderly out there. Was it as it looked to us back home?
It definitely got much more ordered. I can tell you that. Again, as we were there and the coordination across the board, and people were able to sort of settle out and create that kind of order out of chaos through battle rhythm, all the normal stuff you hear about, that, all those things work.
The stuff you train for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is what I think led to ultimate success was all of that. But yes, it definitely did become ordered, very ordered, in fact, whether it was the multiple daily touch points with all the partners that were there on the airfield, allies, partners, interagency, and then also with the Taliban themselves.
Were you able to, and then when you finally arrived, Sergeant Major Pitt, were either of you able to take some time to interact with your soldiers who were on the perimeter, and how were they doing? Did they have questions for you?
Well, I don't think I spent a lot of time in the talk. I think the boss asked me to just be out there, seeing soldiers. So my daily battle rhythm was, after the update, go stay on the perimeter, talk to soldiers, talk to the paratroopers. I think they had questions, of course, simple questions. What do we do if this happens? Following their leadership. And then just to ensure that, I think every paratrooper there, whether it was the private or the lieutenant or the commander, every echelon, wanted to ensure that they got, every American civilian as possible. So those were the questions they were asking, like, okay, can we take this person, And when in doubt,
Afghans
right,
asking,
and when in doubt, they took them. Like, they wasn't like, well, we're not. No, when in doubt, we probably said yes more than we said no.
Interesting.
And the other key thing too, I guess the first thing is battlefield circulation was absolutely the most important thing for both of us, and we spent as much time as humanly possible at interacting with our paratroopers, Minnesota National Guard, and 10th Mountain. There's an MP company from Fort Drum at a 16th MP. Literally, they came off the plane and we said,
"Go to the gate.
You're the reserve."
Go to the gate.
Well, we said, "You're the reserve," and they became the reserve. And we said, "Now rehearse going to all these various gates." And they rehearsed that action, and they performed unbelievable, just like all the other soldiers, sailors, and Marines that were out there. But there's all these, as you bring up these comments to us. It's unbelievable how well these folks did. But I can tell you, whether it's for battlefield circulation, that was absolutely the most critical portion of what we did, because that allowed us to, one, things were happening so fast and it was changing so quickly that if you didn't have that constant movement and have that ability to communicate, and also, most importantly, understand what they're going through, so that we can actually make, from what ultimately the CENTCOM commander needed to get accomplished for the mission, all the way down to what reality was, aligning that guidance, that was hugely important.
Join AUSA, the Army's premier professional association and host of the largest land power exposition in the United States. AUSA is open to everyone, including all ranks and components. So whether you have a relationship with the U.S. Army or simply want to honor those who serve, you can learn more at www.ausa.org/join.
So, Sergeant Major, my assumption is the majority of your young paratroopers and leaders had never deployed before. Is that a fair assumption or not?
No, that's not an assumption. Remember, this is the brigade that got deployed earlier that year. It wasn't. They had experience, but of course, every deployment's a new experience. You can't rely on what you learned or actually did in the past. You have to be prepared to be flexible. So the experience was there, especially amongst the Sergeant First Class and above and Captain and above. The experience was there.
Well, I wonder, on that question, did those soldiers, the paratroopers, even though they had deployed, I know they were in Afghanistan over the past 2 years at some point, right? Did they have a sense of the history of this mission? Did everybody have a sense of the history of this mission?
So,
the historical nature of it.
Well, I would say, before I hand off to the general, I'll just say this. You had sergeant majors, first sergeants there that served there as privates. So it was not lost on any of those leaders, the historic nature of it. They were there as privates. Now they're closing out this mission as battalion sergeant majors being the last people to close it out. So that, I think in some ways that's, I don't want to say gratifying, but it's very emotional to them and very real to them.
I was wondering about the emotion of it. There must have been some tears.
No, I think everybody was, from the soldiers' perspective, especially the ones that have been there multiple times, I think being able to see something through and at the end and not be on the sidelines, but actually see it through, that did mean a lot to them. That meant a lot to them.
And I think also the importance in the, CSM Pitt talked about getting as many people out. I don't think people understand the drive, the demand, and how everyone was trying everything they could to get every Afghan, every U.S. citizen out. And I purposely kind of say that because the U.S. citizens were easy to get out, okay? If they showed up, the Taliban wanted them out. It was in their interest, by the way, to get them out as well. It was getting all the other Afghans out as well. Obviously.
So help us understand what that was like. I mean, we saw the images, but we weren't there. We couldn't smell it and feel it like you did.
One of the things I just want to make sure that we talk about as well is because, yes, we were pulling people through the gates, but ultimately the State Department was the folks that screened everybody to come back. And I only say that because that's an incredible burden to put on people, right? You're now determining whether or not someone gets to leave Afghanistan or not. So it wasn't just we pulled people through. State Department individuals, human beings, were the ones who ultimately voted up or down on whether or not they could come out. I think that's sometimes lost on people a little bit too, of what all they did specifically to help get people out.
So, and I have a great story. So, we're at the Southgate, the terminal, and we talk about, the care of the paratroopers. And, I was out there with the battalion sergeant major, and one of the NCOs came up and said, Sergeant Major, there's a family over there. But it was very chaotic. So every time you tried to get some person, 50 people would rush you. And so we went over there, family about 8 from Seattle, of all places, right? And the young boy spoke perfect English. And so I called him across the wire and I said, show me your documentation. But we couldn't take them all at once. So what I told the sergeant major would do was every 10 minutes, go get one of their family members, and we sat them over. And they did that. And when we got everybody over, we moved them inside and got them on to their destinations. But those are the kind of stories that all the paratroopers, all the Marines at every gate were doing. They weren't just, they were invested in ensuring that everybody that they could get, they got, regardless. And, they went and got them. They didn't just say no. They went and got them.
And all under the constant pressure of ISIS, suicide vest threat, vehicle-borne IED threat.
There were multiple threats during this whole time. I mean, how did you work through that?
And that was probably the part that we balanced, I think, on any given time period, there's somewhere between 50 and 60 ongoing ISIS threats against the airfield. And the intel community across the board was doing everything they could to get us that information, not just the 82nd, everybody, right? And so you're constantly balancing that threat that was out there. Everybody knew it was out there. And those paratroopers and other soldiers and Marines that were out, that was why we were out there battlefield circulating, walking amongst all these kids, trying to keep a good feel for what was truly possible and what was not. And, ISIS, we can't say too much in this forum, but they were throwing the kitchen sink at us, right, up until the very end. And that was the part that you were constantly balancing, right, of protection of clearly your soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and then also the citizens of, you're trying to pull through, American, other nations, and then just other Afghans we were trying to pull through. And then, dealing with the actual ISIS targeting. All that was occurring simultaneously. And then, by the way, again, you're planning for getting everybody out. You're running an airfield. You're doing all the normal things.
And there's a deadline.
And
the whole time.
demilling equipment and feeding paratroopers. And
wow.
As days got longer and the base got smaller, resources got shorter. So, our cooks were, where they had defects that were run by contractors. Now it was just U.S., military cooks in there cooking for everybody and getting food out to the farthest point.
If you would see these synchronization matrices that we had to do, you have contract
fuel.
You have security forces that, as these security forces are leaving, getting closer to the deadline, you're now picking up more of the airhead, which now impacts how you're going to do your joint tactical expo. So you're constantly balancing all this with the threat. And by the way, you're still having aircraft flow in and out.
It sounds like the whole 20 years just came down to a small version of what a lot of people went through all through their deployments over there. Where were they doing the cooking, and where, how did that happen?
So they had hard structures. Again, it was a fully operational base, but, as the days got shorter, the contractors were leaving before us. The U.S. soldiers, sailors, Marines, the Air Force, we're actually supposed to stay there, was getting all the contractors on the aircraft and getting them out. So as they left, think about, it was a city. So who's running the sewage plant? Who's running the trash pickup? Because trash is still being made. So all these things fell back to the paratroopers and the Marines, and, disciplining soldiers, disciplined Marines do disciplined things. And then you just, we always joke about, you never know who you have in your formation, what they did in their previous life. And you can go anywhere and say, hey, who knows how to do this? And somebody go, well, I did that before I came in the Army. And then they're on there fixing, runway lights, or they're doing these amazing things outside the scope of being an intel person or being a chaplain assistant or whatever.
Changing a C-17 wheel.
Who knew how to do that?
Yeah.
The paratroopers did it?
You can go on and on with all the amazing things that the young kids did. Now, sort of a funnier thing, too, is the State Department, when they left their portion, they left all their number of high-quality food was there. So certain portions of 1st Brigade, we were eating at the division headquarters, we were eating MREs. Okay, we were up with everyone else, right? So we were out battlefield circulating. I'm like, how are you guys eating steak and lobster?
They was like, it's like, this stuff is all going to go to waste.
We better eat
get
it.
Send this stuff out. They had makeshift stuff out there, cooking steaks, chopping them up out there, at the most furthest away points. But that's what, ingenuity does when you don't have anything else.
These details are remarkable, and it's really great to hear the stories. Before you left Fort Bragg, when you got the mission and you were getting ready to go, obviously you two knew a lot more before the troops found out and the plans were coming together. Were you able to get everybody together in a sort of I'm thinking of like a general assembly of some kind where you were able to say, this is what we're going to do, be strong, this is the mission. Were you able to even yourselves anticipate pulling people through the gate one by one? Did that come into play?
When I say getting together, I think every day you hear the boss say, be ready. be ready. So getting everybody together, that's every day for PT. That's every day we walk by a paratrooper. Be ready. Be ready. Not get ready, be ready, especially if you're on IRF, right? And so I think from that standpoint, we knew it was going to happen. I think I left the office and drove around 1st Brigade and watched everybody's phones go off as the alerts came. And they all looked at me and they said, "Is this real, Sergeant Major?" And I was like,
"Oh my goodness.
Are you ready? Let's go. Let's go. And so from that standpoint, I think
culture and process got us there.
Okay.
I'm just telling you right now, the operational readiness cycle and our culture. We have a document.
You were ready.
I'm just telling you that is what made it so that we could handle anything now or in the future that came down the pipe.
Anything that comes down. But was there anticipation of that personal nature of this mission of getting these people that you've known for, during your deployments over there? And, it must have been heart-wrenching in many ways to make a plan to pull one family member through every 10 minutes, such as the family in your story. And that's an intimate mission there.
I think that, paratroopers, they're American citizens, right? They're people from all over the country. And so, a mission like that, it's important to them. You get there and you see the desperation on people's faces, right? And the paratroopers, that's one of those times I think you look out there and you understand the privileges you have as an American, and then you do everything in your power. They do everything in their power to ensure that someone else is afforded that opportunity.
So they rose to the mission, the human part of the mission.
Absolutely. If you look at all those things that we were talking about, right? I mean, Scott, you've done a lot of these things, but imagine doing a full force rehearsal go back to your Ranger days, an airfield exfil. Think of an airfield seizure, and you are now in contact with with thousands of people at the gates, ISIS, this group that has come together, and you now have to do the departure from an airfield seizure. That's the joint tactical exfil, and now you have to rehearse it. I mean, think about while you're on the line. So when you think through all the various things that we were doing, just the rehearsal of not leaving the last little over 800 people that were in that final exfil. I mean, just take that task alone while doing everything else. I didn't even mention all the other stuff that we talked about.
Well, gentlemen, we talked about this before we went on the air, just how proud our country is of your paratroopers and your leaders at Echelon. But I think it speaks to the discipline of your individual paratroopers, the discipline of your leaders. This just doesn't happen because All-American 6 and All-American 9 show up. This is going to happen. It should be happening whether you're there or not. And you get to go there and reinforce the importance of the mission, kind of provide context. But this is the beauty of your organization, that your culture is, I understand the intent of my boss a couple levels up, and we're going to get this mission done. And we're not going to leave any Americans behind. That's why America is so excited to hear your story, because we sat there in awe in the month of August and watched you all do things that we just could only imagine.
And the other thing, too, all the time we say majors fight this division. Every single thing, every one of those huge tasks that I talked about, that's majors planning that operation, and then us making sure that it gets done to the standard that you just described. I mean, individual paratroopers and majors are what made this happen.
Yeah, so I think you go back to discipline, and I tell everybody that will listen, the discipline of the paratroopers, I was just in awe of it. You want them to have it, you want them to do it, you instill it in them, and then the time comes and when they execute it. And then to see every night, like, we'd be on battlefield, sir, and it'd be 1 o'clock in the morning, and 10 people hop the gate, and nobody got shot. They were just right. Afghans trying to get away. But, to the undiscerning eye, to the undisciplined person, that could be a threat. And even as, we were exfilling people jumping the gate, nobody got shot. It wasn't that the danger wasn't there for the paratroopers, but that's where I think I'm mostly very proud of the discipline of every individual one. So paratroopers.
Can you put that in the perspective of the threat? Everyone who came through, you had to assume that they were wearing a suicide vest.
And the paratroopers knew this. I mean, they were aware of the threats as much as you were. Okay.
We were. As soon as we would get the intelligence, it would get broadcast out across our networks to everybody. Okay. And if the intel came in via the Marines, they would get it out to us. If it came in through us, we would get it out. If it came in through Admiral Baisley's headquarters, everybody, when it came to the threat, everybody was tracking the threat across the entire task force. I mean, that was, the intel community rose up, I can tell you that, and did everything they could to make sure we were aware of everything.
And everybody was communicating. How were you communicating?
Radios, a lot of time, it's funny, we do these training exercises, and he says, if you go to visit somebody, you should either be bringing something or bringing something back. And so every time we left to do battlefield cert, we would have the most updated intel. And like, this is a time when you go up to that fighting position and say, what's the latest thing you heard? Okay, here's the update, right? And so, again, that's, from radios to face with commanders and sergeant majors and first sergeants and company commanders.
Every means possible.
Every means possible.
Constant. Because the situation was so fluid. I mean, the threats were constantly changing and updating. But you had to be out doing that all the time. I mean, I won't get into what our personal battle rhythm was, but I just tell you that we spent as much time as humanly possible out and amongst that perimeter. Yeah, so I mean, in the 82nd, our motto is going to be flat, fast, accurate, and lethal. So flat means everybody who's supposed to know knows it. Fast means that you're communicating and you understand your environment so much that you're actually anticipating what's going to happen. It's not just that I can communicate to you fast. It's just that we've kept people so well informed that they can think fast, they can act fast, they can anticipate what's going to happen. Accurate, that's everything that I tell each other. We know that if Donohue shows up, he's going to tell me that to the best of his ability what he knows and understands. He won't BS it, and that he's trustworthy. Okay, and that doesn't matter if it's up to CENTCOM, down to a subordinate, to Brigadier General Sullivan and his team, to Admiral Baisley, the guy that ultimately we were working for. That's about trust, that accuracy. And then lethal, whatever we're supposed to get accomplished, we get accomplished. That's what flat, fast, accurate, and lethal is to this division. And I think that played out in spades out there.
Is there anything that, I know there were a lot of threats that you were receiving. Were there any other concerns that weighed on you as the deadline approached? I mean, having that deadline must have just been a little bit of pressure, I would imagine. Anything you would have done differently? If you've had time to reflect on anything you would have done differently.
So I think two things. One to that is we constantly communicated. This is what the end looks like. We always, our constant motto is here. We keep the end in mind. Okay. What does HCI need to look like when we've all departed? Okay. And part of that is what were we setting up that would allow people to still leave the country? And I think that's the one thing that, whether it was the, demill, all the equipment that was there. I don't want to get into too much sensitive stuff, but to make sure that we left nothing back that was there that the Taliban or anybody else could use. We were actually very successful with that. But the other one is what are we leaving in place so that we can build upon? Whoever is in charge in Afghanistan, doesn't matter who it is, what are we building upon so that we can have that? But most importantly, how can our citizens continue to depart the country? So bringing in Qatar, so that, reopening the international terminal, getting all the agreement. It was bigger than just the 82nd with some of the agreement portion of it with the Taliban, but we were constantly telling people, okay, and then what? And then what? To make sure that was accomplished, which I think the other agencies and everyone else did it. Ultimately, I know we're getting into a little bit of political space here. I don't do politics, but we knew we had to make sure the mechanism was in place to continue to get people out.
Yeah, I can imagine that would have been a constant communication with them on those types of things. Was there anything there that you were unable to accomplish that you think about now and said, I might have done that differently? And only at where it's operationally feasible to talk about. So,
unable to get done. I don't know. I would just say that as you got closer to the end, the boss always had to keep the end in mind. You realize that, you don't have that minute that you lost a minute ago, right? And so when when paratroopers and leaders and Marines are executing things, you don't have time to go back and do it again. Like, because you have there's no more minutes in that day. There's no more minutes on the clock come the end of it. And so everything was done calculated. Everything was done, with a purpose. Every person moving on that NH had a purpose, and they stuck to it, and they did it because everybody understood that there were no more minutes. So if you had to get it done, you saw it through. It's one of the times where you didn't, you went and checked, but when you checked, it was done because that was the message. There's no more minutes. Like, even in the last 24 hours, it was like, it's 24 hours. It's not 24 hours plus whatever. This is it. And so the things that needed to get done got done.
So how did you actually wrap up? Did people leave in waves? And, back to that iconic photo, were you in fact the last guy out, General Donohue?
We've been asked that several times. Yes, in fact, that's the way it did come out.
That was not staged? No,
it was not.
You've painted a great picture of how it was when you got there and all the things you did while you were there. How did that last step take, that last minute? How was that last minute spent?
The same way the first minute was spent, I would think, and which is being vigilant, making sure we accounted for everybody, making sure that we cross the T's and dot the I's, and, the boss checking with each one of the commanders to ensure that we had everybody. So, which is the same thing we did when we got off the plane, was we spent it the last minute doing the same thing we did the first minute.
Making sure that we're taking care of our people, and that meant especially the threat. I mean, I won't get into all the assets and everything that we had, and as we're trying to communicate and make sure that we're protecting those last 5 aircraft, getting them all lined up, and then jumping on our last aircraft and heading out. So I think that was the focus at the end. Again, I'm keeping it G-rated for this, but you were very focused. But I will tell you, if I ever thought that's how I was going to leave Afghanistan, probably isn't the way I thought I was going to leave Afghanistan.
Did you have a vision for how you were going to leave Afghanistan that you want to share? No. I do, but I'm not. But you're not going to share it. Well,
because it gets into politics.
When
ending of a war is not always. We don't determine how the war ends. Right.
You mean soldiers don't determine
how a war ends,
okay.
Right?
I just remember sitting on the ramp, looking over at the boss, and then I just reflected on a span of the life of a paratrooper. Like, to me, personally, it was just like, wow, like to have spent my whole career in the 82nd and to read about all these things from, Normandy to Bastogne, and then to this. It was to be a part of it. I couldn't have thought of a better place to be for a paratrooper that has been paratrooping so long. It just was like, wow. Like, I just looked over the boss, and I was like, man, someday this is going to be really important. Like, and then you just look at the paratroopers.
You felt the weight of it.
Yeah, you just look at the paratroopers, on the aircraft with you, and you're just extremely proud of them. You're like, and you're just extremely proud of them. So you're like, man, wow, they did something really big.
I think the enormity of, 124,000 people out over a very short amount of time. One, it speaks to not just the 82nd, but everybody who was out there, but also the United States Air Force and what they were able to take out of there. That's incredible, right? But I think just the sheer sense of pride of what everybody did and accomplished. Like, just kind of leave the politics of the Afghan war out, but just what they accomplished. I'll always be so incredibly proud and thankful of what each of those paratroopers and a member of that task force did.
Well, I'd like to just take you back, if I could, to what Sergeant Major Pitt said about, some of the senior NCOs were there as PFCs, which really, made an impact on me. When you said that, I realized, wow.
It's a long time.
The whole world watched the withdrawal. But, after and while that was taking place and after it happened, Army Chief of Staff General McConville sent a message to the force that asked soldiers in part to check on teammates and former soldiers who, and I quote, may be struggling with the unfolding events. So, General Donohue, you were there for the withdrawal, but you were also there over the years and had formed your own relationships with the Afghans, I'm sure. How have you weathered your own feelings about it and helped others work through what could feel like moral injury?
Yeah, so it was sort of a bookend, one of the first people into Afghanistan, and then obviously one of the last out. So the first thing is, we went there for two reasons. One, to hold people accountable for attacking our nation. And two, to make sure that no attacks came out. So during that time period, what we as, soldiers and leaders could do, I think we did that, especially when you look at kind of our generation, Scott, this generation here that were, first time there as captains. So that if you look at how we bore the brunt of the cost of this, I'm just incredibly amazed and thankful for what all the great teammates I've had in the past and the guys for me, guys that we lost. Absolutely amazing what they did. And I think I'll just always be incredibly proud of what they did, okay, and what they did for each other. Whenever you think about what a soldier does, that's really it, okay? I'll let other people evaluate all that other stuff at a later time, right? That's not I'm a tactical, everything I've did in Afghanistan has been tactical. And I just think that I'll always be immensely proud and unbelievably thankful for what they all did. But to go back to, are there people that are hurting? No, I'm sure there are. Okay. And we got to reach out and talk to them. We got to be willing to talk about our experiences. And as far as the Afghan partners go, I'm talking to them constantly right now. And I think, we'll come back some other day and talk about the lessons learned out of Afghanistan and other places. I think they're very important, and but not for this podcast.
Okay.
What I would say is that, here we have the Alliance efforts living the legacy. And so what I would say to, any paratrooper struggling with the last 20 years and losing friends and did we accomplish our mission, who has a great perspective on this Vietnam generation, and they're still around. And so I would encourage a lot of paratroopers, or anybody in the military that thinks they're, that feels they're struggling with it, to talk to Vietnam veterans, because they're probably the closest that if you were going to relate an ending, maybe, that would be able to tell you,
to
how
answer
they
the question, what it was all for,
right,
and things like
right,
that.
Right. But, what I would tell the paratroopers, though, is that, be extremely proud of the service, talking to some of the first sergeants and sergeant majors, those PFCs that, got off the plane in HKI or wherever in Bagram, as a young private, specialist or whatever have you. And now to close it out, like you saw it through to the end, right? And you should be proud of that. And you should be proud of that.
So I think the first thing is the first deployment I know of that we made everybody go through behavioral health screening. And the chaplain actually has a program where all of our chaplains, everybody's fully engaged. And we actually have set up a number of programs just for people to go through and just talk about their experiences, because it was very unique. It was very different. I think we had over 60 some paratroopers that are actually going through the process to adopt Afghan children. So there's a lot of, I'm one of those people who believe that combat can actually make you better. It can make you a better human being.
How's that?
Just when you go through and you experience everything that you experience, I think you see things a little bit differently. And I think it can make you a much better person. Doesn't mean you don't get me wrong, we all got our issues. I'm not acting like we don't. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that doesn't, there's certain things I'm sure my family wishes I did a little bit differently, right? But I do think that it can make you have the ability just to self-reflect and make yourself better as well.
I would think just remember, I think it started with the perspective of the paratrooper. how many lives did they change, right? We got a lot of Americans out, and we got a lot of Afghan civilians out. How many lives did they change? I try to ask them that. How many Americans did you just make? Because we made a lot. And those little kids that got off, that got handed over the gates, those families that had nowhere to go that we were able to get out, we made a lot of Americans in the future. Time will tell, but I would think it's a safe bet that we probably made a lot of great Americans. People don't forget that. And again, if you want to look for historical context, go back to the people we brought out of Vietnam. They're probably all functioning Americans right now that took advantage of a opportunity, became part of this great country. So if I'm betting on the people that we took out, I'm going to say 50 years from now, they're going to be great Americans.
124,000 people have an opportunity that didn't have before.
Are either of you adopting any children?
No.
I have 5 children. We adopted 3 of the 5. I can't handle what I got.
Okay, we'll just leave it at that then. General Donohue, Command Sergeant Major Pitt, it has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time from what must be a very busy schedule to spend some time with our listeners. And we hope you will come back and join us for another conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this podcast series. In part 2 of this special edition of Army Matters, Gina and I interviewed Captain Kyle Hawks and Sergeant First Class Jeremy Brown from the 2nd Battalion 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. That interview will be posted on ausa.org/podcasts on December 8th. We will post our 3rd and final interview with paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division on December 15th.
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the Army Matters podcast on iTunes and everywhere podcasts are found. The Army Matters podcast series is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at AUSA.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission to educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and our supporters of a strong national defense. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. Have a great Army Day. Hua.